A dangerous subversive elite has managed to infiltrate the highest levels of Western institutions and governments to implement the criminal plan of the Agenda 2030. In many self-proclaimed democratic states, the voices denouncing this global coup are being silenced through censorship, intimidation, psychiatrization, and even arrest. Among the victims of the totalitarian regime quietly establishing itself in Europe, Canada, Australia, and other vassal nations of the United Nations, NATO, World Health Organization, and World Economic Forum, all private entities funded by the same powers, is lawyer Rainer Fulmich, unjustly imprisoned and still awaiting for a fair trial. His crime is having dared to speak the truth in a world of criminal lies. I call on Catholics and all people of goodwill to raise their voices in defense of those persecuted by the globalist regime. It is not Attorney Fulmich who should be imprisoned, but those who committed the greatest crime ever against humanity: Anthony Fauci, Bill Gates, Klaus Schwab, George Soros, Ursula von der Leyen, Albert Bourla, and all their accomplices and emissaries, especially those in institutional positions. Free Rainer Fulmich.
The current pandemic has brought unimaginable devastation to people's lives, livelihoods, and national economies. At the same time, the green recovery represents an unprecedented opportunity to rethink and reset the ways in which we live and do business. Now, I've long believed that we need a shift in our economic model that places nature and the world's transition to net zero at the heart of how we operate, prioritizing the pursuit of sustainable, inclusive growth in the decades to come. Having been championing climate action now for the last, 40 years, I can tell you that this isn't a fight for the faint-hearted. However, increasingly we are seeing more and more businesses, investors and consumers prioritizing sustainability and thus creating a much more virtuous circle of supply and demand. By leveraging market forces and the immense resources of the private sector, there is hope that we can transform the situation. But I'm afraid we are literally at the last hour, and there is real urgency for action. We know now what we have to do to rescue the situation, rather than going on talking about it.
Joining me now is Ned Ryan, American CEO. Ned, great to see you tonight. It seems that the goal of this crowd is to kind of create the same panic about climate change that they successfully created around COVID. Do I have this wrong?
No, you have it correct. I mean, first of all, we have to accept the World Economic Forum is a fanatical political organization that uses fear and manipulation like COVID hysteria, like the hoax of global warming, to really facilitate people thinking that somehow they're the saviors, but really all you're doing is helping them accomplish their goal, which really is a global public-private fascist movement and fusion of big government, big tech, big money to create a technocratic ruling elite, which conveniently is them. And really, Laura, if you want to look at a different way, too, with the World Economic Forum, they want to create feudalism 2.0, in which we are serfs and they are the lords ruling over us. You'll have nothing and be happy, is one of the things that comes out of Davos. That's what they're aiming for. They're aiming for feudalism in which we are serfs and we should be happy that they are ruling over us.
That order seems to not be the order anymore. We are on the way to a new order, so we are between orders. Do you agree with that, or are there ways of what are we able to keep on the positive side from the old order to bring into a new world order, and how can we avoid that new world order becomes like a jungle growing back, and we rather have order based on international law and the principles that have brought us prosperity and freedom for decades.
I guess, and maybe this is the old kind of teacher in me coming out. I think of this a little bit more about a transition of eras rather than a transition of orders, but the two are kind of cousins of one another. The reason I draw the distinction is because I don't think the international order built after 1945 is getting replaced wholesale with some new order. It will obviously evolve as it has evolved multiple times over the decades since 1945. But I do think in a more sharp and distinctive way, we are moving into a new era, and that's what I talked about in my remarks, that we are, the post-Cold War era has come to a close. We're at the start of something new. We have the capacity to shape what that looks like, and at the heart of it will be many of the core principles and core institutions of the existing order, adapted for the challenges that we face today.
We fear that there's going to become a collapse. I read the articles now that with Trump's tariffs, there's going to be the end of global cooperation, which could hinder the development of ultimately of globalism. And then, of course, we fear that there will be digital totalitarianism and the surveillance state. And then, if that isn't bad enough, I just watched an interview of Elon Musk, and his big concern now is depopulation of the planet. Instead of overpopulation, which the UN is still trying to control, we find that the population of the Earth is actually beginning to contract and get smaller because we're killing off many of our unborn, and we're also sterilizing people so they can't reproduce. And part of the drive for the gay relationships, the LGBT community, is they don't reproduce. That's one of the things we know about people who marry people of the same sex. Their capacity to reproduce is greatly reduced. That's because I took introductory biology. And if the depopulation thing isn't the scariest thing, because we know historically that countries or nations or states which shrink in population actually shrink in power and influence. The most wealthy, successful countries in the world are places like Singapore, where they have people hanging out all over the place. They're most densely populated, and yet they're the most economically efficient and successful because they actually deal with that issue in a positive way. And I mean, you pile all that, and then you throw on top of all of this stuff, you've got Donald Trump, an existential threat to greed, waste, criminality, and so forth. Anyway, when you add all these crises together, whether real or whether perceived, because I'm not saying that none of them have any validity or any degree of validity, but when you throw onto it the things like unemployment and lockdowns and infodemics, inflation, illegal immigration, mass civil disobedience, riots, random violence, unpunished crime, racial jihadists, cultural and religious divisions, and Nazism, and things calling for the dumping the Constitution or dismantling of the culture with BLM, Antifa, Islamic commie Nazis. When you have all of this stuff going on, is it any wonder that so many people feel so anxious, so stressed, even so angry, fearful, and insecure about the future? Now, part of that is diabolical in the sense that if there's anything that Satan wants to do is he wants to disrupt order. He loves chaos. And that's the thing, is that chaos creates confusion, and confusion creates a collapse of a culture. And when the culture collapses, then more powerful entities can come in and take control. It's a simple plan, whether you're talking about Zelensky or the communists or the Nazis or anybody. They just have this whole thing, create confusion, that leads to chaos. Chaos will lead to a collapse of a culture. People become divided and distrustful of each other, every man for himself, and then somebody needs to come in and bring overall control. This is especially symptomatic of cultures who have forgotten or lost faith in the one control factor that has always been the ultimate stabilizing force in the universe, and that is God himself. That we no longer see God as the master of the universe or the maker of the universe, But he becomes really nothing more than a semantical device to explain the things that we can't explain.